Welcome, everybody, to Coming Home with John Allen. This is the segment called Coming Home Commentary. And welcome, everybody, to this edition of Coming Home Commentary. I'm your host, John Allen. And today with me, I have my good friend and two-time guest on Coming Home with John Allen, the podcast and debate program, Hans Jakob Winses. Today, we're going to talk about the two different approaches, or two of the many different approaches to addressing societal problems. One method is addressing people as individuals in efforts to solve these problems. The other method is addressing socio groups, be they economical groups, ethnic groups, racial groups. Before I have anything to say about it, I'd like to hear what you, Hans Jakob Winses, have to say about this, please.
Well, I think that when it comes to meeting the need of people, the best way to do it is on an individual level. If you have if you put a group in a box and you put people in like a group, it's you are always going to have individuals within that group. And for example, like if you say to this group is struggling, so we want to give extra amount of money, for example, like through taxation or like less taxes to, for example, a certain specific group. And there's always going to be some people in that group that are better off than in the so-called more the group that is richer or that has a better standing in society. It's you're never going to hit every person in that group. So, like for example, if you're a white Norwegian, there's plenty of differences within that group. If you're black Norwegian, there's plenty of differences within that group. So I find it can be really devastating to kind of put people in groups and we kind of treat you as a member or group instead of, no, we treat you as an individual. So that's like the short view of my opinion.
But does it have to be an either-or situation? Of course, people are individuals, but these individuals are in groups. You're a Christian man. You're in that group of Christians. There are other people who are not Christian or not religious at all, and they are in a certain social group. There are people who are wealthy, and they are in an economic group. There are people who are poor, and they are individuals, but they are in a certain group. So I guess what I'm saying is of course people have their individual status, individual responsibilities, individual issues, but when we are flock animals, as we are as humans, there is, for better or worse, certain groupings within society. Are you saying that you feel that those groupings should not exist, or are you just saying that those groups are there but they shouldn't be dealt with to right the wrongs in society?
More the second one.
Okay.
So of course you will always have groups, like we all like the traditional saying, like birds of a feather flock together, and that's like something of human nature, and
right.
You can never stop that because that's natural. But when you're dealing with a group, you're dealing with individuals, and there's so many different experiences and backgrounds and stuff like that within the group. For example, Christians, like we have, I don't know how many thousands of denominations with different view. Like we all say that we have the Bible as a foundation, and then you still have like this massive differences within Christianity. So you can't deal with, for example, Christians as a group because we are very different. And so, well, let me say it this way. Like I deal with you on a personal level. The challenging thing is when we talk about politics. And for example, if Trump made a ban on it was called the Muslim ban, like from the immigration from certain kind of countries. First
terrible
of all,
situation.
But first of all, like Saudi Arabia, for example, which is the most populated Muslim country in the world, I think that they're one of them. There were a lot of Muslim countries that were not put on a ban. It was certain countries in the Middle East that had a lot of we have a lot of history of violence and stuff like that. That those countries were put on a ban.
Yeah,
and
but I just have to jump in. That's an example of Republican or right-wing ignorance, because to not include Saudi Arabia in this ban, which was supposedly because there's so much danger to be had. I don't agree with this, but this was the right-wing, the MAGA reasoning, was that there's so much danger to be found within certain Muslim communities, or Muslim nations rather, and yet Saudi Arabia was excluded from that ban. And yet, if we go back to 9/11, where was this planned? Who were the drivers of the 9/11 attack on America?
We can go into specifics there, and
but I'm just saying that's an example of the flawed logic of how groups are dealt with, at least on the right. And again, I'm not saying it should be either or. I believe that there should be a combination. Situations are fluid, just as there are dynamics within these groups. There are dynamics on the exterior of these issues, and to close one's eyes to the value of groups and to the dynamic of groups and to the effectiveness of dealing with groups to me it's a losing struggle. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think that, for example, if we as individuals start treating people as part of a group, we have a problem. When you come to policies,
but isn't what that policy did? It grouped Muslim nations and then thereby executed a policy.
Let me continue, because Please. I'm talking about now on a relational level. If me as an individual treat you as a part of a group only, then we have a problem. But we all do it in human nature is like that, because, for example, men are more violent than women. And Fact. If you meet a man in a street, walking down the street or late at night, your chances to be physically violated by that man is bigger than if you meet a woman down that alley.
Yes.
Therefore, you take more precautions and you kind of make a judgment of that man, because you don't have a relationship to the man. You have to make a quick kind of a judgment. Okay, it's a man. And then, for example, then you have the challenging thing that can easily become racist and stuff. But for example, if you have a people group that, let's say that this people group, 10% of the men there are, for example, violent. And then you have a people group that 2% of the men are violent. And you can kind of make overviews of that.
Sure.
As a person, then it's easy for me if I meet a person from that people group that has 10% men that are violent, I'm going to be more alert than if I meet another group that only are 2% violent, right?
Of course.
So it is a challenging thing. What we should strive towards is to build relationship. On the relationship level, we have to meet the individual. But on if I don't when I first met you, or if I've only seen you on podcast, I could make a quick judgment of you, and it could be a judgment that would be totally away from the reality of who you are. But I find who you are when I build relationship to you. But we all make quick judgments of others, and that, I think, it's part of human nature, and we will never get away from it.
Of course, I think the problem with quick judgments, of course, it's human nature to it's called a first impression. Whenever you meet someone, you get a first impression. That's basically a judgment of their character, sometimes how they look, their capabilities, their social status. This is natural. This is normal. I think the problem with that judgment is when it is a judgment based on malice or malicious intentions, and that's called bigotry or prejudice or racism. And that is the judgment of the individual that can cause harm. I believe also that racism, that prejudice, that bigotry is also applied all too often to groups. And I gave the example of the Muslim ban and the hypocrisy and the senselessness of it. The same people who are screaming to the rooftops about personal responsibility or judging or taking people on an individual level went for this Muslim ban, which was lacking in logic when you exclude Saudi Arabia. So it's a thing that is, it can be debated, the effectiveness of dealing with people in groups and dealing with people in individual basis. But I think that because we have this thing called human nature, there's nothing inherently positive or negative with judging or dealing with people as a group or dealing with people as individuals. It depends on the situation. For example, in the United States, there's a big problem with economic inequality. I don't see how that can be effectively dealt with unless it is dealt with on a group basis, because there are very clear lines that delineate these different socioeconomic groups. You have those who are suffering and those who are doing quite well. Of course, you have somewhat of a middle ground that's disappearing over time. So I ask you then, how would you deal with socioeconomic problems in the United States if you don't look at groups?
I think that's very hard. It's no easy solution. And I think that we have to be humble enough to realize that it's
we can
super
agree
hard.
on that, absolutely.
But for example, like we mentioned this, the first podcast I went on with you, Jordan Peterson, he talked about, for example, the different income between men and women.
Yes.
And when you, in average, men earn more than women, and it would be easy to come to a conclusion, well, then it's unfair. We have to make it easier for women to earn more so that we come to a similar level. Well, when you went into the numbers, well, men are more they're more prone to move cities and stuff like that to get a better job.
Yes.
Men have harder jobs, they work longer hours and everything like that. When you took all those into consideration, there was very little, if any, difference between men and women.
Right,
and
but isn't
women,
that a case of grouping people and then making an evaluation? In other words, I think that's yet another example of how we do deal with people as members of groups in order to solve problems.
Yeah, but the point was that you can't, for example, if your goal is to get the women to earn just as much as men in average, right? When you have all these different factors, for example, a woman, let's say, like, if I'm a business owner, and just take all the social justice out of the picture. If I'm a business person, I get two people that I'm interviewing. I have a man that is 25 and a woman that is 25. They're both the same. They have the same education. They're just as likable and working hard and stuff like that. I know that if my business, in average, women are more away from work than men. In average, for example, a woman that is 25, the chances that she's going to get a baby within the next 10 years is quite high, which is going to bring a more struggle to my business. Let's think
but I understand,
that it's just a small business.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but I think then yet again, that's an example of taking a person, in this case a woman, and applying a definition of a group or the tendencies of a group and applying it to that individual. You're saying women do this, that, and the other, which is more or less correct
in average.
Yes, but yet again, but this is where I'm challenging the logic here, because this is yet again an example of taking a group, the definition of a group, in this case, women, and saying women are going to have children, women are going to be more away from work, et cetera, et cetera. You're taking certain tendencies of a defined group and applying it to the individual. I say that to a certain extent, that's human nature. Of course, when we get into malicious intent, bigotry, racism, and exclusionary tactics, it's of course wrong. But when you are that businessman and you're simply evaluating what kind of a person you want in there, isn't that taking the tendencies or the definition or the implied definition of a certain socio group and applying it to an individual?
Yes, you are.
Yes.
But
so it's
my
okay
point,
then to put people into groups.
One thing I think that is important to differ, because I think that we agree on so much, but it's like, I think that it's important to see what is nirvana, like what is like the perfect society,
Yes.
and what is reality.
Yes. Yes.
And what I think that if we go for nirvana, like the perfect society, we're going to screw up society so much more than if we, well, this is reality, this is human nature, this is what we have to deal with. And one more thing about the difference between
Yes, quickly,
groups
please.
and individuals.
In 30 seconds or less, if you would, please.
Yeah. Our society has become less relational. We're living in big cities. We're less relational. So the fruit of that is going to be that we end up treating more people as groups. In an old society, you had neighbors, you had small communities, and you had the family, and you could deal with individuals because you knew the individuals. But in today's society, we don't know the individuals. So I'm sorry. I think that a lot of the fruit of that is that we deal with people more in groups than before.
I can't argue with that. There is a problem with people connecting on an individual level, but that is the reason for my show, Coming Home with John Allen. That is the reason for this type of segment, Coming Home Commentary. I want to bring people closer together. I want the dialogue. I want the discussion. Hans Jakob Winses, you are wrong about so many things, but but I love you. I send the love. But I send the love, as I know you send the love.
Back at you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your thoughts, for your opinions on this here. It's a discussion that more people should have. It's a discussion that needs to be had. It is something that affects our society, whether it be here in Norway or back home in the United States. Thank you, Hans Jakob, for talking about this. Thanks.
Love you, buddy.
Thank you. Right back at you. Everybody, remember, go to johnallenpod.com. That's where you can find more information about the work I do. The best way to do that, check out my audiobook. Go out there, love and be loved, and enjoy the process. Goodbye.